you guys, this is Jessica Noam here at Trax in Chicago for another episode of What's That Sound? And we are dedicating today's episode to YouTube users Heavy Machete and Logan Severson, who have been requesting Tired of Sex by Weezer for at least 3 months.
The drummer was Patrick Wilson. There's like 10 engineers on Wikipedia for this. We have no idea who engineered it. And it is one of the more bombastic sounds of the era. It sounds wild. It is unhinged. Severson, this one's for you.
For our drums today, we decided to give our favorite 70s Gretsch kit a break, and Noam actually opened the doors to the studio today and found an SJC drum set there, and we figured that will do quite well for this video today. So we are using an SJC custom drum set. For our snare drum, we used a Ludwig Supraphonic. We used all Zildjian cymbals today, 14-inch K-Suite hi-hats, 18-inch K-Suite crash, and a 21-inch A-Suite ride.
So we set out to figure out this drum sound. We knew that it was recorded in the 90s, late 90s, so we figured, all right, we'll set up a drum kit the way that they would typically set it up in the late 90s, which is probably about 14 mics, miking everything individually, double miking things, double miking kick, double miking snare, overheads, multiple room mics, the whole thing. We started pulling up the mics, and the first one I pulled up was the room mics, and I said, holy shit, this is the entire sound basically right here. So we went in, pulled down all of the mics except for room mics, one kick, one snare. So the only weird thing about this sound is that you hear this wide sound on all of the instruments. On the kick, on the snare, everything is wide, right? Which to me that says these are not direct mics, right? Direct mics generally are mono because you're sticking one mic on the snare, that's a mono signal. The snare on this sounds really, really wide, which tells me that they're probably barely using the direct mics at all. The only weird thing about this sound is that even though everything is wide, you hear a very focused cymbal sound in the center of the mix. It's pretty faint, but it also sounds very kind of processed. It sounds very compressed. It sounds very EQ'd. My suspicion is that they either just stuck some mic that they trashed up and stuck it in the middle mono, or what might have happened is they had a mic up for them to sing live in the room or to sing scratch vocals in the room, and they ended up just using it as part of the drum sound and compressing it and having it be a part of the cymbal sound just to add a little extra energy. So let's listen to the individual mics. On kick drum, we have a Beyerdynamic M88. So we're running this through a Neve 1073 preamp, and we're running it through a DBX 165. That is a super punchy compressor. It is adding a bit of attack to it, and we're accentuating that by adding just a little bit more high end and a little bit more low end with our EQ on our 1073. Snare drum, classic chain. This is an SM57 through a 1073 preamp through an 1176, just giving it a tiny bit of compression. It is the greatest snare drum chain that you could possibly have in the entire world, and it just sounds fantastic. We're adding with the EQ on the 1073 a decent amount of high end, and we are adding a little bit of low end at like 100 hertz. Now, what is most of the drum set? Let's hear our room mics. In placing these, we knew that the placement of these microphones and the choice of the mics was going to be almost the entirety of how this drum kit sounded. As for the placement, I knew that I wanted to be super phase coherent between these two mics. If you spread mics out, as like a spaced pair, right? One over on the left side of the room, one over on the right side of the room. What you're going to end up with is a wider image, but you're also going to end up with an image that is not quite phase coherent, right? It's going to have some kind of cancellation because the wider that things are, the more that they're going to cancel when they come to mono. You have to be conscious of this because if you're going to rely on a stereo microphone for some of your low end of your drum kit, some of that low end is going to end up coming out of a subwoofer, right? And a subwoofer is a single speaker. So how those things add together and combine to come out of a mono speaker is really, really important. Rather than spreading these mics out, we did what's called an XY pattern, which was we used two microphones and they were at a 90-degree angle from each other and they were as close physically to each other as possible. The capsules were physically as close as we could get them. And what that means is that even though we're getting stereo imaging because the left side of the room sounds different than the right side of the room, the frequency spectrum is different, the dimensions are different, so we get this imaging, the drums are all getting to the two microphones at exactly the same time, which means that even though there's frequency differences between the two sides of the room, there is much less timing differences, and it's gonna come together as a mono unit in the low end much, much more coherently and gonna add to each other rather than subtracting from each other. The mics we chose were Coles 4038s. We picked these because they are enormous sounding. We knew that we wanted a lot of body from these mics, and these sound huge. We also knew that the cymbals were going to be a problem in this sound. They're going to be really bombastic, and the drums are going to be very cymbal heavy, and we know we're going to have to tame the cymbals a little bit. So Coles are really dark microphones, and they're really smooth in the high end, so they can help us do that a little easier. On the processing front on these, we ran them through a pair of distressors. We are barely licking them. We're not compressing them nearly as much as people think we are because even though this is a really bombastic and really energetic drum sound, if we compressed it too hard, it would bring up all the cymbals and we would end up with a kind of unusable sound. If we were using this as a room sound to accentuate direct mics, then we could get away with more compression, but because we're relying on these so heavily, we needed the transients to be a little bit more intact so that we could use them as the main part of the drum sound. You'll also notice that there is some distortion on this drum sound. It seems like it's almost getting worse in the chorus than it is in the verses. The verses are a little less distorted and the chorus is even more distorted. We chose to do this with the plug-in decapitator. It sounds fantastic. We're just turning up the input on it, nothing really crazy, and we put that just on the room mics so that we could leave the low end punch and the transients of the low end just a little bit more intact on the direct mic and have the room sound just crazy, distorted, bombastic. So that last mic, which I am suspecting might have been a talkback microphone or a live vocal mic, let's take a listen to that. All right, this was a Sennheiser 421. We pointed it literally at just a wall, right? Because we wanted it to be the placement as if it was someone's vocal mic, which would not be facing right at the drum. So it has a really distant sound, which is kind of cool. It also has like a very mid-rangey sound because I kind of EQ'd it as if it was a vocalist on it, which would have had just a little bit of a brighter sound and a little bit more mid-range that we would need from that microphone. And then I ran it through an 1176. I gave that just a little bit of compression just to add some extra energy to it. I am in not all buttons in mode, but the mode where you jam the ratios 4 and 8 in at the same time. So it's kind of halfway between 4-to-1 ratio and an all buttons in crazy ratio. It's just a little bit extra exciting. And I also ran a little bit of decapitator on that just to add a little distortion. And it's just peppered in there just to give us a little extra excitement. That was Tired of Sex by Weezer.
Thanks for watching, and as you now know, we really do read the comments and take your requests very seriously, so please let us know what other songs you'd like to see us break down, and we will see you next time.